This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that was designed to absorb pressure quietly and has started making noise. Not explosions, not headlines. Signals. When systems fail loudly, you notice. When they fail silently, they accelerate. What's happening right now is the quiet version, a sequence of decisions that look unrelated, a set of warnings that sound conditional, a kind of tension that doesn't announce itself, but compounds. You're being told this is contained. You're being told it's manageable. You're being told it's familiar. It isn't. Because once a system starts replacing ambiguity with certainty, once it trades flexibility for red lines, it stops bending. It starts snapping. If you stay with me, I'll show you how this pressure was built and why the most dangerous phase always feels calm at first. This is where it begins to move. What actually controls this system is not ideology, not borders, not even weapons. It's dependency. A dependency on money moving without interruption, on information flowing only one way, on force being applied without consequence. For decades, this system worked because each pressure point compensated for the others. Economic weakness was masked by control. Control was enforced by force. Force was protected by uncertainty, by the belief that no one would interfere directly. That balance is gone. What's in charge now is not authority. It's timing. When money tightens, force gets expensive. When information leaks, force gets visible. When visibility meets explicit consequences, force hesitates. This is why personalities don't matter here. They're interchangeable. The structure isn't you're watching a system that can only survive if every piece functions at once and is now discovering what happens when even one fails. And that failure didn't start with violence. It started with something slower, which is why the next shift was almost invisible until it wasn't. The most dangerous changes never arrive as shocks. They arrive as adjustments before pressure-triggered negotiation. Now, pressure triggers containment. Before, disruption meant reform. Now, disruption means shutdown. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened incrementally. Each response just slightly harsher than the last. Each justification just a little broader. At first, it looked like enforcement. Then stabilization. Then prevention. Until prevention required isolation. Until isolation required silence. What used to be temporary became routine. What used to be exceptional became policy. And because it happened slowly, it felt survivable. But slow change has a flaw. It trains everyone inside the system to rely on permanence, on the assumption that tomorrow will resemble yesterday. That's the assumption cracking now. Because once a system teaches itself that escalation is normal, it loses the ability to stop escalating. And the first moment that truth became undeniable was not theoretical, it was measurable. And when it surfaced, it forced every actor to choose speed over caution. That's where the first real shock appears. The shock didn't come from a speech. It didn't come from a treaty. It came from bodies. A number started circulating, then confirmation that the count included teenagers. Confirmation that it included the people meant to enforce order. This wasn't chaos, it was friction. When force is applied at scale, resistance doesn't disappear. It changes form. It spreads. It pushes back. And suddenly, the system that depends on overwhelming control is paying a cost it didn't budget for. Every uniform loss matters. Every civilian death multiplies attention. Every incident raises the price of the next response. This is the moment systems usually try to go dark, to cut signals, to slow perception, to buy time. But time is the one resource this structure doesn't have. Because the more force it uses to restore quiet, the more visible the damage becomes. And once visibility crosses a certain threshold, containment stops working. At that point, the crisis stops being internal and something else is triggered. Here's the mechanism most people miss. This system doesn't run on belief. It runs on payroll. Control is not ideological, it's transactional. Force requires funding. Funding requires uninterrupted flow. And uninterrupted flow requires workers who keep showing up, even when everything else is shaking. That's the quiet bargain at the center of this structure. As long as money moves, loyalty holds. As long as loyalty holds, order appears intact. But this is a system without reserves. No cushion, no margin for prolonged disruption. Every day of unrest drains liquidity. Every shutdown raises costs. Every delay forces harder choices about who gets paid and who doesn't. That's where pressure changes direction. Because once payment becomes uncertain, obedience becomes conditional. This is why force escalates so fast. Not because it's effective, because it's expensive and running out of time. And once a system starts using violence to compensate for financial fragility, it exposes the exact lever that can break it, which is why the next crisis didn't slow things down. It sped them up. Now the pace changes. Signals accelerate. Decisions shorten. Mistakes compound. Silence is enforced. Connections are cut. Screens go dark. But the dark doesn't hold. Images escape. Numbers leak. Proof moves faster than control. Every attempt to isolate creates another breach. Every shutdown confirms fear. Every denial sharpens attention. This is no longer a slow squeeze. It's a feedback loop. Force triggers exposure. Exposure triggers scrutiny. Scrutiny triggers consequences that are no longer hypothetical. At this speed, calibration fails. There's no time to fine-tune repression. Only time to choose between escalation and hesitation. And hesitation is visible when a system designed for certainty starts broadcasting uncertainty. It teaches everyone watching that it is vulnerable. That lesson spreads faster than orders, faster than threats, faster than fear, which is why the next phase doesn't begin in command rooms. It begins with ordinary people recalculating risk. And that's where the system loses control of the timeline. This is where it reaches you, not as policy, not as geopolitics, as consequence. When systems like this tighten, they don't just break leaders, they compress lives. You feel it in delays that didn't exist before, in prices that jump without explanation, in decisions made far away that suddenly land in your routine. You're told this is temporary. You're told it's necessary. You're told it's about security. But what's actually happening is transfer risk is being pushed downward. Cost is being absorbed by people who didn't choose it. This is how instability spreads without moving, how conflict travels without crossing borders. If you've ever wondered how distant crises end up reshaping ordinary days, this is the mechanism. Stay with me. Because once systems start exporting pressure instead of resolving it, they don't return to equilibrium. They search for release. And the next place that release shows up won't feel abstract at all. At this stage, the system stops being local. Pressure doesn't stay contained inside borders. It follows networks, markets, energy routes, information flows. When uncertainty touches supply, prices react first, quietly. Then suddenly, allies start recalculating, not out of loyalty, out of exposure. Every government watching this asks the same question: what happens if this doesn't stabilize? Because if the flow stalls here, it ripples outward. Insurance premiums rise, shipping routes adjust, diplomacy hardens into positioning, and once positioning begins, neutrality disappears. This is how a domestic rupture becomes a global variable. Not through declarations, through anticipation. What makes this phase dangerous is not what has happened. It's what everyone is preparing for. Preparation creates momentum. Momentum narrows options. And narrowed options make restraint look like risk, which is why at this point, even doing nothing becomes a choice. And every choice accelerates the system towards something it can't easily reverse. What comes next isn't escalation yet. It's alignment. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Pressure is redistributed just enough to keep the structure standing. Payments resume. Signals soften. Violence pauses without resolution. On the surface, it looks like stability. Underneath, it's deferred stress stored for later. The second is erosion. Nothing breaks all at once. Instead, capacity leaks. Compliance weakens. Enforcement becomes uneven. The system survives, but thinner, more brittle, every cycle shorter than the last. And then there's rupture. That's when timing fails completely. When money stops moving before control adapts. When deterrence is tested, not referenced. When escalation isn't chosen, it's triggered. The danger here isn't intent. It's sequencing, because once a system reaches this phase, even actors trying to prevent collapse can accelerate it by misjudging one moment, one signal, one delay. We don't know which path this takes. What we do know is this. Systems rarely reverse after this point. They only transition, and the final phase doesn't announce itself as an ending. It announces itself as necessity. This is not the moment where things resolve. It's the moment where they stop pretending to. Systems like this don't collapse with noise. They hollow out. They force decisions to be made faster than understanding can catch up. What you're watching now is not a crisis in motion. It's a future taking shape under pressure. And the most dangerous thing about it is how reasonable every step looks on its own. Each warning sounds conditional. Each response sounds defensive. Each escalation sounds unavoidable. That's how systems move people toward outcomes. No one claims to want. If you're still here, that matters. Because attention is the one variable this system can't fully control. Stay with this story. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's unfinished. What happens next will not arrive as a headline. It will arrive as a decision made somewhere quiet, under the assumption that there is no other option. And by the time it feels obvious, the path back will already be gone. I'll be here when the next signal appears.